Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to this webinar from wherever you may be watching and listening to us today. I'm Scott Wilson. I'm from X-Type. I'll get to that in just a second. But today, what you have joined is our webinar titled Principles of Process Reviewing Common Release Patterns. And indeed, that is what we'll be covering today. A little bit about what the agenda is and what we are covering today specifically. Obviously, we'll do a few introductions, give a little background intro of myself, as well as my co-host today, Tim. And then we're going to walk through some common release processes that we see in the ServiceNow community. And then we'll cover how X-Type can enrich those processes. And then we'll end with some Q&A at the end with this. So let's just jump into this. I already mentioned my name is Scott Wilson. Probably the more distinguishing or noticeable part about me is I have two L's in my last name. That is not a typo. That is by design or by birth, as it were. And I live in the Atlanta area. I am currently the head of product marketing here at X-Type and come from a software development background and have now, moved into marketing, kind of a yada yada from writing code to now being in marketing. But with that, Tim, I'll turn it over to you to give a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. My name is Tim Probin. I am the senior field engineer here at X-Type. I've been in the ServiceNow ecosystem for going on about 15 years now, working with multiple implementation partners, supporting customers through all different stages of their ServiceNow lifecycle.
Perfect. Excellent. And we are very glad to have you, Tim. And Tim, you're just continuing our practice here at X-Type of hiring ServiceNow journeyman as part of this, which will become important as we dive into this. So let's go ahead and dive into it, shall we? Okay. So what we have here, Tim, is kind of an aggregate of kind of the release patterns you have seen in your career and that we've heard from our customers, and we've kind of put them together in one big picture, and we'll kind of get to those and go through the details. So why don't we just first start with what is typically going on? I'll build this out here. So we've got an integrated dev environment or a line of business dev environment, and I guess a few sandboxes. What exactly, at least thus far, are we looking at?
Yeah, so right now we're looking at most customers, well, I say most, some customers have a dev environment that everybody's working on for kind of global applications, their standard ITSM kind of stuff, and then individual line of business development instances for things like HR or security operations, ITOM, those applications that need to be somewhat segregated in their development so that they're not impacting, other pieces. And then, of course, you have your sandbox instances to help with potential upgrade processes, clonings, other. I want to try this new application because
like X-Type.
we like X-Type, or
from the X-Types from the ServiceNow store.
Yeah. So you have, you have a wide variety of different instances that you've got multiple developers spread out across that entire scope.
Exactly. And kind of collectively, then we tend to look at this as we'll get to that in a second, basically your dev environment, right? And here are some of the team members, right? No surprise, developers.
Right.
But then we progress. You've got an integrated test environment. We have a bunch of team members listed here.
Yeah, so you go from that widespread variety of dev, and everything's got to make it to a production instance at some point. So you're bringing everything together into that integrated test by moving update sets, scoped applications, data, whatever information's needed for that release from the different environments gets pushed into that one integrated test environment.
Exactly. And this is where development spends a good amount of time handling errors, preview errors, conflicts, those sort of things. Obviously, right? Because each one of these instances are pushing to this instance.
Yeah, and they're all pushing different code, right? And where you start to run into those preview errors and other issues is you may have pieces getting touched in different instances that are similar, and who wins, which one comes first, and how do you then keep track of, if I made a change in the LOB dev instance to a business rule that's needed in the integrated dev. How do I know that?
Right. You don't until
Right.
you start having these problems here. And we should probably also state to, again, this is a kind of an aggregate trying to normalize or average out what we hear from our enterprise customers and from your own experience. So it's also possible that they might have a couple of integrated tests if these LOBs are actually going to a separate production instance. Obviously, this could be kind of replicated out.
Right. That's definitely possible. You can scale this model.
Yep. And so then as we move on, there's that next level. I've got some Excel spreadsheet icons here. If you want to explain what those might be and what happens when we move from an integrated environment to a UAT environment.
Yeah, so this is where you start building out those run books, right? How am I going to deploy this? How we have a big release that spans multiple dev teams. We need to track what update sets need to go, what order do they need to go in, or do we have any fixed scripts that need to be run at a certain time, XML data that needs to move, right? And you've got to start building out those run books and basically practicing with those run books. So you're moving all of that information from test to UAT through those Excel spreadsheet process.
Exactly. And that's part of the review sign off that occurs at this point, right? Because effectively, and you can see this by the number of people, the titles or roles of the people we've listed here, you're basically compiling this list and throwing it over the wall, as it were, for them to.
Right. You're generally not using your developers to move code into the higher instances and into production, right? You have a release team, a platform owner that's responsible for those things. So your developers have to put together what's the plan and how do I move it?
Exactly. Correct. And then of course we move on to staging. This may be called various things, but I like to refer to it at the end of the day as kind of a clean room. You've probably recently cloned this from production, right? As we're showing here in the diagram, you've consolidated the run books to the precise ordered list of things that are going to go into this. Is that right?
Yeah, you're looking at a pre-production, an instance that is almost exactly production. And this is when you're combining all of those run books into that single release and ensuring that process works properly. And we're not running into any issues moving update sets and code and all of that.
Ideally.
Stuff.
Yep. Exactly. And of course, ultimately, that means there's going to be some big approval process, review, whatever, before we move into production, because that's you can't afford an unplanned downtime or unplanned outage or anything like that issue.
Right. Yeah. So we're tying into change management at this point and make sure that we're scheduled, most likely late night on a Friday or over the weekend, war room set up, everybody's online, working 10, 20, 48 hours trying to get this moved into production and successful. Hopefully it's not 48 hours.
Yes, hopefully not. But yeah, exactly. And I already animated the other slides here, the other changes, because like you'd mentioned, change management. Exactly. The beautiful thing of ServiceNow is if you're developing on ServiceNow itself can also be your system of record. In that production instance, you're not only just pushing the changes, you're also marking in it, right? Oh yeah, this is the change request, this is going through, and the kind of the success failure is designated. And of course, your whole release team can see this and all the different stakeholders. The one thing I'll pause here, we look at this again, it might be some customers I know I've personally had contact with, I don't know about what you've seen in your career, Tim, that maybe you have 3 environments or pillars here. I came across one that actually had an additional one in here. Actually, a couple of customers I've talked to have another one. They have another whole environment they called, I think, Hotfix or something like that. I can't remember, but regardless, there's some variability to this. But yeah, what I wanted to pause. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say what I wanted to pause and just talk about for a minute is this may seem laborious and it may seem bureaucratic, but the enterprises, right, are big companies haven't created this on their own for just fun times, good times, right?
Definitely not for fun times. Yeah, you're looking at this long process for release to ensure that when you're moving into production, you're not causing downtime the environment, right? So you've got to have all of the steps, and sure, it can scale or it can get smaller, right, with less swim lanes, but when you have less instances in this process, you're looking at less chance to test how you're moving all of your releases.
That's right. So this formality is really a form of protection, as well as there's compliance and governance issues that also helped create this, right? Especially if you go into very heavily regulated industries such as financial services, healthcare, pharma. These processes are also a matter of not just troubleshooting if something went wrong. Oh, well, who moved what and what happened? So you can triage it, but also like, no, you're proving only these people have access to these things. Only this data moved, right? Those kinds of regulatory things. You tend, the things that come to mind are like SOX, separation of duties, the payment processing standard, data standard, Graham Leach bylaw. You could go on and on with the different regulation compliance things, but this formality is also kind of dovetails into a lot of those, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does. You're right. You're required to test each of those individual run books and prove that you've tested those run books and show any failures and
That's right.
All of that.
And you got your bill of materials, the payload is documented, right? And so, but there's a problem is how long in your experience do you say it can take? And I know there's some variability here, but from going from dev all the way to production, what has been that span that you see?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of variability there, right? And that's, the size of the application that you're implementing and how much the processes impact your business. But you're looking, at the smallest, you're looking a month or more, right, for a simple application to get it to move because of all of the testing that's required and all of the documentation needed in order to
right.
get through this process, right? And
yep,
I've seen
ahead.
customers take 6 months to a year to release a single application because of the release process.
Yep. And some, of course, take less. I've seen some that are releasing something bi-weekly or actually mostly like monthly or whatever, but still all this is going for, isn't it? And it's laborious. And so one of the ways you can streamline this, and ServiceNow is recommending this, is to create a COEI team. And as you see, what's nice about a COEI team construct is that you now bridge these silos to try to remove the friction between the silos. So the collaboration is happening with a team instead of trying to not necessarily throwing things over the wall. So it's like, man, you guys deal with it. We're all on the team and you're now able to collaborate, right?
Yeah, and it's bringing some of that release team back farther towards the development process and also spanning your developers a little farther into the process to help kind of give that cohesion.
Exactly. Cohesion's a great word. And that's a good step. But here we at X-Type would say that's probably a good first step, but we can do more. So let's talk about what X-Type has here real quick. So this is going to look very similar, but you see our lion here, our mascot here, Cash. X-Type is installed on each of these instances, right? And so now what occurs here? Well, now the migration can go to the integration test environment where X-Type is also going. And as you see here at the top, Tim, right? This could actually now be automated. It doesn't have to be a manual thing, right?
With X-Type, you have the ability to automate the deployments of update sets directly from the instance, but you also have the ability to keep those manual. We use a application deployment flow to determine kind of how those are going to move. It also brings in, as you can see at the top, ATF, code scan, manual approvals, the ability to kind of track and allow approvals of that code to move. So even if it's automated, you could still have that manual step in there to say, yes, I do want this to go.
Exactly. But we at X-Type don't stop there. We also have this great capability called controlled synchronization, right, Tim? So the same ATF scan, whatever that goes forward could also be employed going backwards, so that as a developer makes a change, let's say in our integrated dev environment, moves into integrated test, that change is then migrated or communicated to each of the other instances, along with whatever fix may have taken place to
right.
correct.
And that's really where the beauty comes in, right? We talked about earlier of, I've got developers on integrated dev and LOB dev that are touching the same object. Well, as soon as it's completed in one of those instances and moved to test, we're going to smart sync that back into the rest of your development environments and give you the latest and greatest of code as you're working. So you're going to know if there's a change directly when there's a change versus finding out later down the line.
Exactly. And having been a developer, I will tell you that is a huge, huge thing, because when you talk about later down the line, that could be weeks later, days
Right.
later. And now when you present, I get this preview problem, let's say, then I'm like, well, wait a minute, why was that a problem? You know, I solved this how many weeks ago or days ago? I got to kind of go in the Wayback Machine, right? But what Xtype's doing is taking those potential problems down the road and then we're shifting them left, right? With the syncing, because now this happens in the dev environment at the time they're actually writing your feature or your app, right?
Right. Exactly. It's speeding up time to move from development into a test environment and keeping development all in sync, versus if I held my update sets in the old process and waited for a month to move them because I didn't get approval to move to test at that point. I'm not knowing what's failing and why it's failing until I've done that move. And
exactly,
then we have to go to all the other lines of business developers, find out what they've done, whether or not their code's right, my code's right. So with our Smart Sync, you're providing that visibility immediately.
exactly. And the same principle can apply moving to UAT now, right? Now you'll notice here what I've got is the dev teams are now kind of grayed out. This is because since Xtype is doing the migration, and we're to be transparent, we're actually using your trusted migration mechanics that ServiceNow provides, right? So there's not like some magic here.
Right. We haven't built anything that isn't available to you day one with ServiceNow.
That's right.
Right. We're just taking out and facilitating those manual steps.
Exactly. So the beautiful thing is we're talking about compliance and governance, Tim, is right. Just one of those concepts called the principle of least privileged access, right, is occurring here because developers actually don't need admin access or elevated privileges to these instances to do the things. Xtype is doing it, and not just Xtype, but as you said before, the processes, ATF, well, it's doing an unbiased your process, whatever your process is, that's going to allow something to be moved in the first place. Xtype will execute that for you automatically, right?
Correct.
Or
and we also,
or by schedule, whatever you want.
Right. And as we build out this slide, you're seeing cache is on each of these instances. So we're providing visibility to all of those instances, but you don't necessarily need that admin access to have the visibility. So your developers
Correct.
can stay in their development environment while still being able to move code to the other environments that they have access to move to.
Yep. Now I'm going to move us along a little bit here, Tim, for time's sake, but you notice that instead of spreadsheets, we got this box, what we call an Xtype package. An Xtype package, release package, is something we at Xtype are bringing to market. Do you want to explain what an Xtype release package is and how it's different from a spreadsheet?
Well, sure. Yeah. So it's essentially those spreadsheets, but automated, right? We bring those spreadsheets directly into Xtype, right? And allow you to put together update sets, put together scoped applications that need to be upgraded, run scripts, move XML and data records, all into plugins. So everything's into that one package, and we move that package based off the order that you've set. So essentially, we're taking the run book out of an Excel spreadsheet, putting it directly into Xtype, facilitating that move for you.
Exactly. The way I look at it is instead of spending hours or days building one or more spreadsheets and dying by 100 different tabs to figure out where everything is and itemize it and do the migration, Xtype, since we're everywhere, we know what is where, we know where the differences are. And you just, from a pick and click list and drag and drop ordering, you just tell it what it wants to do. And then that payload or bill of materials is now being migrated for you. You don't need 100 tabs open anymore. Right.
Right. And you have the ability to allow your developers to build that package, right? They're the ones that understand their run book. They can build that release package, and you can have multiple release packages that all run on a single release.
Right. And development is not having access to these other instances, or is kind of what we're advocating here. We're actually in this diagram advocating that maybe it's QA that's building the package and moving forward. But whatever, it's your process, you control it. Xtype's just enriching and expediting it, right?
Yep. And now with this you have the ability to test those packages from UAT to staging. If you need to add additional items into a package, you update your packages and you have your test to understand that everything's there, ready to go, along with the auditability and traceability of who moved it, when they moved it, how long did it take for those packages to move between the environments. And it allows you to build out even more information in that change request than you had in your spreadsheets.
Exactly. And these packages can be deployed by schedule. So you can set such and such time that's going to go out.
Yep.
They can be manual. Like we said, they can be triggered once you have that approval and go off the schedule. But they can also, as we're showing here, be tied to a change request, just like you probably already do. And when that change request hits the, what is it? The
scheduled. Well, once it hits, yep, once it's been scheduled, so it's gotten through its approval, it looks at the plan start date, and once that plan start date hits, the package will run for you.
So it's beautiful. So that can be automated. So you're actually using what you already know, but once that happens in ServiceNow, then this bill of materials gets moved in the order that you set it up to. So now I got some arrows going back the other way. So we've talked about controlled synchronization going back. Just for time constraints, I would just say that, well, just because we've shown it coming here into your lower environments, there's nothing stopping you from doing it from production. Indeed, some of our customers do. So if you have that hot fix, Tim, that comes into production, right? Well, then we already talked about that one of the problems is these environments, they start becoming dirty and looking very unlike production.
Right.
Right. And so then what you're doing then with these instances not looking like production, then you're baking in problems and of course a process lag into all of this, right? Because now production's got some data and some plugins or whatever it is that the other environments don't have, which means you're going to have what when you start moving to production?
Yeah, you've got preview issues and drift, right? And it essentially removes the need for cloning for code. Right. So if I had to create a hot fix because of my release to go into production, I'm not advocating that you make those directly in production, but if you make them directly in production, within an update set, we would bring those back into your other environments to keep everything in sync.
Exactly. But the beautiful thing about X-Type is you can pick and choose what your process is. And of course, now, hopefully with everything we just described, we've actually enriched your COIE team if you have that construct, because now everyone is dealing with actuals, not planned things, right? They're not dealing with something outside of ServiceNow like a spreadsheet. No, it's in. When you order the list, that's the stuff that's in ServiceNow that's moving, right?
Yep.
There's no theoretical anything to it. But X-Type does even a little better than that. We have complete real-time multi-environment visibility and traceability. So your COIE team or your ServiceNow teams, however you're organized, can actually now see, well, what is where are my inconsistencies? What are the differences? And of course, as we already discussed, those can be automatically addressed, but now we're actually enriching the team. As you can see,
customers have been raving over the fact that they can see what version of which app is available on which instances, and why don't I have this update set on
right.
test and dev, but it's on UAT or it's sourced with staging. Yeah. So the ability to just see everything on a single pane of glass across your entire environment has been extremely huge.
What I like to say is your ServiceNow team or your COEI team is going from point in time kind of reporting, looking to real time.
Yeah.
And that's a huge, huge shift that you can't underestimate the amount of time that it gets. All right. So that's basically covering what we wanted to cover. Just to summarize things here, and we'll get to some questions here, is well, do you want to just summarize it for us, Tim, what we've basically covered?
Sure. I mean, we've covered the ability to move update sets, automated, manual, zero touch, all the way to production, if that's the way you wanted to go. Update sets synchronizing between instances so that you don't have instance drift. Our release packaging to remove spreadsheets out of the need for your releases of ServiceNow code, and then of course the inconsistencies.
Exactly. Absolutely. And then lastly, a little bit about X-Type. We are the de facto standard for ServiceNow platform engineering. We do have a global team. It's a really cool thing about X-Type. We have we're all over the place. We do have an app on the ServiceNow store, so you can actually get started today. You can download X-Type View is what it's called, and install it in your instances and take a look at some of the visibility, the multi-instance visibility we were talking about. And of course, we are a trusted partner in the ServiceNow community. So with that, let's just go take a look at any questions we have. So let's see here. We've got a couple of them. So let's see here. So Tim, what I'm seeing here is there's a question about how is this actually streamlining things? Maybe we could touch on that one last time. The question is how is streamlining things using X-Type really going to make things go faster?
Well, that's best answered with an example, right? I was working with a customer recently, and they were testing out a release package that they had manually done in one of their environments with spreadsheet run books and going through the full process. And the release to production for them took 16 hours. We ran the same exact run book by building release packages within ServiceNow that had all of the update sets, the fixed scripts, everything. Took them a matter of about 3 to 4 hours to complete, right? So that's giving the developers back so much time, right? And me coming from the ServiceNow development background, and those weekends and nights, I get to sleep again. It's really a great thing.
Exactly. And that's a significant amount of time, because sometimes when you look at these processes, just the act of, oh yeah, we just clone a lot. You don't realize all that pre and post work that has to happen to make a clone ready for new development.
Right.
Right. And as you gave a good example of that, that's just one example, as well as shifting problems and errors and preview problems left so that they're dealt with in context rather than later. Right.
Yep.
So you kind of solve that problem instead of writing new features and apps that have future problems already baked in. The future problems aren't there, at least ideally. Perfect. Okay, one last question. I think we'll wrap it up here with time's sake. We got 2 minutes left. Is how does X-Type work with compliance and governance standards? And if so, how? Well, I guess that's what the question is. How? Well, it's kind of what we already covered, Tim, right? With the compliance stuff, with a lot of these things like separation of duties, the pharma, healthcare, and financial industry, a lot of it's just about having standards for data access and making sure that people only have access to the environments that they have, and being able to document what happened, especially if you think about development, you're inserting change into things, right? So you need to account for that. I think they would all boil down to a lot of those things. And I have worked for a broker dealer before, so I'm very familiar with some of these. And the beautiful thing about X-Type is that burden of proof is automatically done for you.
Yeah, right? And we audit everything that happens with X-Type, right? Every move that happens, we keep record of who did the move, what time they did the move, how long it took, and that's all provided back right into the ServiceNow instance. So you're not going somewhere else to get that information when your auditors ask for it. It's right there for you.
Exactly. Perfect. Well, hopefully you all enjoyed the webinar. Tim, I enjoyed the conversation with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
And we wish you all a great afternoon or evening, and thanks for your time.